All right, kind enough here to give us a couple minutes to analyze everything that's happening with the Israel-Hamas war, the latest in Ukraine, President Biden's military plans. He's the host of This Week Explained, a fantastic podcast you can go listen to wherever you get your pods. Also, an analyst over at Aucoin Analytics, Kervin Aucoin. Kervin, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast with us.
No, thank you for having me. Honestly, I do get a lot of my information from you guys because I think your podcast is amazing. It brings, there's so much nuance going on in the world, and you tackle it in a way that's unbiased, and that's part of what we try to do at This Week Explain. So fantastic podcast. I'm just through the roof just to be able to be on here with you guys.
Whoa. I mean, geez, the adulation here, folks. I don't know if I can fit my my halo through the door or my ego now. I truly appreciate that. And, you know, Nick and I have mentioned it a bunch on the show. Now, look, everyone knows kind of where Nick leans. I try to not have you be able to glean where I lean politically. And that's the point of what a host versus a commentator should be doing. So it's those kind of subtleties that people don't get on television. And that's what I'm trying to bring. So I truly appreciate that's coming out to other people that are listening to the show. So I truly appreciate that. Let's get into what some of your expertise and some of the stuff that you guys do great, that you do way better than Nick and I do. And that's really explain foreign policy, what's happening overseas, the latest with Israel, Hamas. You and I were talking about this off air about, you know, just how many folks have passed away according to the health ministry in Palestine. The humanitarian crisis is unfolding. We've mentioned it a bunch on our show. But since October 7th, right, we still have over 1,500 Israelis that died, 240 hostages as of this taping that are still in captivity. I'm just curious from your perspective, and we've devoted so much to the conflict overall and the history of it, but what do you make of everything before, on October 7th, and after?
Yeah, and I really appreciate you starting with that October 7th, because that's what kicked it off, right? If you look at it in hindsight, does Israel go and do this shock and awe to Gaza if Hamas doesn't perform these brutal attacks? And that's what they are. And we've kind of missed that in the media over the last couple weeks, because the highlight has been, you know, how far Israel has gone. Now, look, Israel's got a balancing act that they have to figure out, right? They could have done none of the bombardment. They could have not hit any of the infrastructure and gone in and done a ground offensive against Hamas and probably protected a lot of human civilian lives. But they chose not to, because they felt that the attacks were so brutal that it required a statement attack into Gaza. Now, I'll give my opinion on here. Do I agree with that? No, but that's trying to fix a Middle Eastern problem with Western solutions. It's what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan when we tried to win hearts and minds. And we tried to keep we as the U.S. and U.S. I was a former Army intelligence analyst. I've been to Iraq. I've been to Afghanistan. I've participated in those wars. And I understand that we tried to win hearts and minds. And it did not work. Look at where we stand right now in the global war on terrorism. It did not work. And I do think Israel saw that, and they realized, well, first we are going to have to completely, and their plan is to annihilate Hamas. And I do want to make that distinction. And if you believe what Netanyahu says and what Israel says, they want to annihilate Hamas, not the Palestinians. Whether you agree with that statement or not, that is up to your own opinion. And I think everybody's opinion is valid on that. But in order to annihilate Hamas, they decided that they were going to have to strategically strike civilian infrastructure that they believe was holding Hamas terrorists. They have shown photo evidence and video evidence of Hamas underneath the Shifa hospital. There are some reports out in Al Jazeera and other publications that say that it's not actually, that what they showed was not actually a Hamas headquarters, but that's a conversation and debate to have between the IDF and Gaza. They've shown this. We've had the PR director for Hamas publicly go on Memri TV, which is an Arab news site that pretty much leans more Arab right wing. And he said that those tunnels that are underneath these civilian infrastructures are not for the civilians. They are not to be put there. They're only there for Hamas and to protect Hamas soldiers, which they consider themselves a military. They are there to protect Hamas soldiers from Israeli attacks, and so that's where they stand right now. So the way that Israel went about, they kind of delayed that ground offensive into Gaza so that they can do these what they would call precision strikes onto civilian infrastructure. And the humanitarian crisis that's going on right there is terrible. Like I said, I do not agree with what Israel did, but I also think that we should also be pointing the finger at Hamas for the same reasons. That putting a headquarters underneath a hospital is not right for a military. They consider themselves a military. That's not right for them to do.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry.
No,
I was
no.
just I was just going to say, while Israel is unfortunately throwing just shooting rockets at civilian infrastructure, Hamas is using human shields, human civilians, Palestinians, people that our hearts should break for as their human shields. And so what's the solution? I don't think I can find the solution from my own worldview because it's so westernized.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've had so many different people that have been to the region, including, like you said yourself, about some of these other conflict zones. And it is so tough because it always plays out when there's something happening with respect to Gaza and Israel. It's the same thing. It's an attack that's levied, and then Israel's response, whether it's proportional or not in the eyes of the entire world. And it's always because, well, they're hiding amongst civilians. So, like, how do you get that person out? I will ask you this. You mentioned something there about the information from Al Jazeera and some other sources, and you credited us in terms of like news breakdown and stuff like that. But like I tell people, we shouldn't be your only source of truth. You should be, taking those series of facts and commonalities that you find across the news spectrum. So how do you guys over at This Week Explain kind of sift through all the information, misinformation, disinformation that's coming out about what is happening in the region? Because you pointed to that IDF example that was, I believe, a CNN report from Nick Robertson, and they were showing underneath the tunnels. And then there was some language that was in Arabic that people on social media said that doesn't translate to what CNN was claiming in that report. So how do you kind of sift through this? Because here's a credible news outlet that's embedded with the IDF, and people are like, yeah, you're showing stuff that's just a calendar. It's a monthly thing. It doesn't actually have names of hostages. How do you sift through all of it?
Yeah, so especially within this conflict, I guess I'm a little bit blessed because I am an Arabic linguist. So I can kind of read things like Al Jazeera, Mimri from the original context, so from the Arab language, and so I do understand that languages are different. You look at we're in the U.S. Look at the Bible. We have so many different translations of the Bible because whatever was written in Hebrew has been translated over time and could have been translated wrong. So that's my first thing is if you are going to a source that's a different language that you don't understand. I know not everybody has the ability to find a translator, like maybe somebody who's embedded with translators, but if you go to that original source, you can identify, maybe the nuance that's going. Now, the way that I do it and the way that I tackle all of these issues is I have to, before I announce something, before we talk about it on the podcast, it has to be multi-sourced, and those sources have to be publicized. Um, Having a single anonymous source is not something that I jump onto. So what I do is talk about what happened, and you were right. That's the CNN report that the IDF showed these pictures and showed the videos to embedded journalists. Well, if CNN is the only one talking about it, listen, there's embedded journalists from Reuters, from the Associated Press, from all over. If CNN's the only one reporting on it, that leads me away from that report. But if multiple journalists are reporting firsthand accounts of very similar things that are going on, then you have a multi-sourced report. Another thing I look at that a lot of news publications are doing now, especially with clickbait, is they it appears that it's multi-sourced, but they are sourcing it from themselves. So they'll mention a topic and then they'll have a link as part of what they're writing to go back to get more information on it. When you click that link, let's say you're on Fox News or CNN, you click the link and it sends you to another Fox News or CNN article. That's a red flag for me. That means that they are attempting to reestablish a story that they had days or weeks ago. They want to do it through backlinks. And that's been the problem with the media, and what I found and why we started This Week Explained and started posting things on Instagram at Aucoin Analytics is because the media has turned into a for-profit organization. And in order to be sustainable, they've got to make more money. To do that, they do more clickbait headlines. And they're hoping you click on it, just read the headline and move on. And that's the story. But if you get into it and you realize that the links they're putting in or the sources that they're using are just their own sources and not eyewitness testimony, or multiple different people telling them the same thing or similar things, then that's an article that I will just close out of and continue doing research.
I like that answer. I could not like that answer more. I mean, I got to be honest. And again, things that a normal journalist would answer back as well. You got to have two sources on or off the record before I'm actually printing it, before an editor is actually seeing it and saying it's okay to go out there. So, but you're right. The model has changed for these businesses, and they know that as well too. I don't think they would shy away from that. I did want to ask you though, as we pivot a little bit here on another conflict that has really lost the media's spotlight and attention, and it's really what's happening in Ukraine. There's a bunch I want to ask you about, some stuff that candidates have said about Russia overall and what is playing out in Ukraine. But first, high level, as you've been covering this on the show and the latest that's happening out there in Ukraine, I saw something that there's a counteroffensive that President Zelensky said recently in the eastern shore of Dnipro, that the Ukrainian forces have secured a pivotal position there. What has been happening in Ukraine? What is the latest that is playing out there? And obviously, that invasion by Russia into a sovereign nation that's not getting as much coverage as because of what's happened on October 7th here in Israel. What do you make of what's playing out there in Ukraine?
Yeah, you framed it perfectly. That's why I listen to this show. You know how to frame a question the correct way. And it's I said it a few weeks ago on our podcast. So the first thing we talk about is Russia, Ukraine. And I say that's probably not what you're going to hear on any major news or major podcast, because we cannot forget about it. Right now, we're basically at a stalemate. I don't see that either side is winning, and that's includes the information operation campaign. Now, each side has won separate battles. Ukraine has fought. They're doing a counteroffensive. It's a slow-moving counteroffensive. They are taking back some of that land in the south and the east. Their ultimate goal is to take back Crimea, take all of that annexed land back from Russia, because Russia is the aggressor. They want to go and just counter all of that, push Russia back. Now, Russia's made some advances in Advirik, I think is one of the name of the areas in Ukraine. They've made advances there, and we're basically at a stalemate. We are so much at a stalemate, and the problem with keeping Ukraine out of our mouths, for lack of a better term, Will Smith. The problem is we have forgotten what's going on. And so now the push from the US to Ukraine is, hey, we cannot support two wars, the Israel-Hamas conflict and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And so you're going to need to come to the table, and you're going to need to capitulate on some things that you said were red lines for you. And that's what they're asking Zelensky right now. We're getting into a time in the weather of Ukraine where that ground, and I was in Poland for an overt anti-Russian aggression campaign. I was there in the November timeframe. It is not fun to be there outside walking around. It's sludge. Your vehicles don't move as well. And that's what we're dealing with, or not we, sorry. That's what the Ukrainians and the Russians are dealing with right now with their militaries, is having a problem moving along the front lines on the ground. So what has Russia done? Russia's taken the fight through the air. They've thrown missiles. They've done suicide drones or kamikaze drones. And that's actually, they hit Kiev or attacked Kiev. They didn't hit anything due to the air defense systems that are in Ukraine. This was the first time in over 2 months that they actually attacked Kiev. And I think it's because of that sludge that is on the ground in Ukraine. And so Russia's taking an opportunity to keep the attack towards Ukraine, especially while the global audience is hyped up on Israel Hamas, the new shiny toy that we all want to talk about in geopolitics. And I do caution against that. Like, let's not forget what's going on the ground in Ukraine. Russia is an aggressive nation that is hoping that everyone forgets what happens and Ukraine comes to the table and starts to capitulate towards some things. And Putin's going to take advantage of that. And that's why the Poles and the Finns and a lot of countries like Sweden and Lithuania are very worried about Russia, especially right now.
Quick break from our pod to tell you about a new pod at Fresh Roasted Coffee, Envy Pods. So if you go to freshroastedcoffee.com, my partner's shaking his head. That's a good transition. What are you kidding me?
It was good. No, I shook my head. I was like, that's brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because I saw this picture earlier. I was like, I saw what you're doing.
It is pretty good. That's right. So listen, the new Envy Pods over at freshroastedcoffee.com, the official sponsor of Can We Please Talk, environmentally safe, compostable. You can go check these out at freshroastedcoffee.com. When you open up the package, it smells delicious. I'm telling you, you can't smell it on here, but I promise you that when I opened this morning to make my cup of coffee, it was delicious. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com today. Use the promo code CANWEGET20 for 20% off your first order, or hit the link in our show details. You know, I'm so glad that you said some of the stuff that you said there towards the end, because the national media, like you said, a little bit of the back burner in terms of the coverage of what's happening in Ukraine. But where I live here in Miami, recently was the third GOP debate. And this was front and center because of funding packages that Speaker Johnson was proposing before the debate happened, this two-pronged approach, and specifically not having Israel or Ukraine funding in the package. Something that candidate Vivek Ramaswamy mentioned on the stage that I criticized later on television as we were talking about media. Apologies for that, Kervin, but I need the exposure. So he said something that I want to play for you here, and I want to get your reaction on the other side. So take a listen to this.
Ukraine is not a paragon of democracy. This is a country that has banned 11 opposition parties. It has consolidated all media into one state TV media arm. That's not democratic. It has threatened not to hold elections this year unless the U.S. forks over more money. That is not democratic. It has celebrated a Nazi in its ranks, the comedian in cargo pants, a man called Zelensky, doing it in their own ranks. That is not democratic. More facts for you that you won't hear from the mainstream in either party or the mainstream media. The regions of Ukraine that are occupied by Russia right now, in the Donbass, Luhansk, Donetsk, these are Russian-speaking regions that have not even been part of Ukraine since 2014, that other people probably couldn't name those provinces for you. Those are the hard facts. And so to frame this as some kind of battle between good versus evil, don't buy it. And I'd like the likes of the sharpest of the war hawks on Ukraine, Nikki Haley, to have some accountability and answer. Do you want to use U.S. taxpayer money to fund the banning of Christians? That is actually what's happening. They're using the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They have banned them. The Ukrainian parliament just did this last week, supported by our dollars. And I think you owe it to the American people, Nikki, to at least this one time at least condemn.
Thank you. That's time.
At least to
Mr.
condemn
Ramaswamy,
their banning
you.
of Christians.
Mr. Ramaswamy, thank you. Mr. Ramaswamy, thank you. We asked the questions. Ambassador Haley,
Well, she deserves to
what
answer.
is your take on more funding for Ukraine?
I am telling you, Putin and President Xi are salivating at the thought that someone like that could become president. They would love to see
The fact of the matter is,
All right, so a bunch there. we kind of demystified some of that as to why they consolidated parties. There was some Russian controlled interest there, why they've consolidated things. But you can see the buzzwords and phrases that Vivek was harping on, and Nikki Haley's response as somebody who was a former ambassador. What do you make first of Vivek's comments without getting too much into the politics of it? This is somebody that could be leader of the free world and has a policy, it looks like, of appeasement towards Russia. And he's spouting talking points from folks that are further right than he is. What do you make of it all? Or even what do you make of what I just said there? Is some of that accurate?
So, okay, let me start by saying one of my favorite lines from a previous GOP presidential debate was from Nikki Haley, who told Vivek Ramaswamy something that I agree with, is the more you talk, the dumber I feel. Like, you have lowered my IQ the more you talk. And honestly, Vivek is playing to a right-wing audience, right? He's a GOP candidate. He's going to be elected by a right-wing electorate. And so that's what he's talking to. And that has everything he has said, or he said, this is facts. This is facts. No, this is right-wing talking points. And that's not just saying the political side of things. These are, if you go to right-wing media sites or conservative media sites, these are what the talking points that you're going to hear. To say, because at one time, Russia controlled Ukraine, or these lands are Russian-speaking areas, is, while it's true, there are Russian-speaking people, the majority of Russian speakers there, and maybe people who identify as Russian, that does not make that Russian land. It would be the same as going to El Paso, Texas, or El Dorado and saying, well, these communities are 70-80% Hispanic and they speak Spanish. Mexico can just come in and take those areas because these people identify more from their Mexican heritage than they do as US citizens. That is blatantly false. That is a slap in the face to sovereignty in nations. What Russia did to Ukraine when they crossed that border was a slap in the face to sovereignty. And I listened, Vivek Ramaswamy has some great ideas on domestic issues, on fixing the economy, but his foreign policy talks are borderline too aggressive for me, I would say.
I mean, you took the words out of my mouth, and a lot of the things that I've said over on television. I think that's part of the reason why we're getting along here, Kervin.
Yeah.
Again, he has
I'm trying not to. Let me try to say something that'll spice things up a little bit.
No, but it's true though. Look, there is one thing to being a CEO and understanding economic policy and zero-based budgeting. Totally agree with some of that and how you execute that. It's another thing to be on the campaign trail and just spout off different things that are not true, A, or B, that you can't accomplish without some of the backings of the legislative branch in Congress. So I'm glad you said some of that. I do want to pivot now. Let's get into the executive branch, because the actual free leader of the world right now is President Biden. And obviously, he just met with Chinese President Xi Jinping recently out in San Francisco. He was asked if he would still continue calling him a dictator, and he gave some type of answer that said, yeah, he's technically a dictator because he runs a communist state. I want to ask you, what has the Biden administration done good, in your opinion, on the military? Because we're seeing right now a holdup with military promotions from Senator Tuberville in Congress. And we're seeing, at least on the right-wing side, there are talking points that our military is down. You're the analyst, you're the expert here. What has the Biden administration done well, in your opinion, or wrong, in your opinion? We saw the Afghanistan withdrawal as he's been leader of the free world and leader of one of the largest militaries out there in the world.
Well, I mean, first of all, let's talk about the Afghanistan withdrawal. I think that was a disaster. I don't think that was fully the Biden administration. I do think he had leaders within the military that explained to him that they did not believe the Taliban would take control back as quickly as they did. Biden thought he had plans in place to secure the military to get them out of there. That completely collapsed as they started to pull out. Listen, Biden's been like every president for the military. He's done good things and he's done bad things. He followed along Trump's line of stopping foreign wars, pulling troops out of Afghanistan was a great idea. It wasn't executed properly, but to stop spending on a 20-year war so that you can start to fund other pieces of the military is excellent. Biden has done an excellent job of that. He's done an excellent job in national security and defense. I say that because his administration is promoting a faster, more agile combat. His administration is calling for, smaller, cheaper, and a lot more pieces of equipment, the use of drones, whether in air, by sea, or on ground. And the administration understands the next war is with China. When Xi decides to invade Taiwan, the U.S. will get involved in that, and that's going to be a war that we have not seen since World War II. It'll be a near-peer battle. There will be information operations. There's going to be what's called anti-denial, anti-access A2AD factors at play, which just means that the GPS systems that the military use is going to be shut down, and we're not going to be able to use that. Drones that we used all over in Iraq and Afghanistan because we had air superiority will no longer be able to be used. And we have to start now training our service members to fight that battle. And I can tell you from my personal experience, the things that I have done within the Department of Defense recently shows that the trajectory of the Department of Defense is along those lines. It is a near-peer battle fight. And how do we accomplish that? So he's done a very good job at that. You brought up Tommy Tuberville. I'm not going to say, listen, I went to the Louisiana State University. I'm not going to say any good things about Tommy Tuberville, the former coach of Auburn. But as a senator, he drew a line in the sand. And I think the Democrats, not to get political on here, but this is just how the fighting went. I think the Democrats went the wrong way in fighting him with that, because what Tuberville did, and you kind of set that up, is he denied voting on all of military leadership that's coming in because of things like DEI and things that he says in the military are leaning to what he would call a woke military. I personally don't agree with that. I've sat through some of these briefings, and it's just it's the evolution of the military. The evolution of the military is going to fit with the evolution of the civilian people, and that's where we're gearing towards. So Tuberville said we're not going to vote on it, but you can vote on these people individually, which Democrats were right, that has never happened. But I understand they don't want to start a precedent, but now they're starting to do those individual votes. And I think if it happened a year ago, Tuberville loses the fight, and he looks honestly like a moron for doing it, because the Democrats would have then said, hey, we're going to call your bluff. We're going to vote these guys individually, and we can get them voted in along party lines. Now, also, just because you have an acting Joint Chief of Staff or acting any one of these leaders of the Marine Corps, the Navy, that may mean that they can't get as much accomplished. But just because you're the acting Secretary of Defense, the acting Joint Chief of Staff, does not mean you cannot put policies in place for the military that extend past your time in office. So I just really think that we are so far from each other that these fights are now affecting the military, and that's going to affect national security. And we cannot have that happen with a more emboldened Xi Jinping, more emboldened Putin, Iran, who's sitting pretty right now. They've got their proxy forces fighting for them in Israel, and the U.S. is sending billions of dollars and stockpiles that we should be increasing are now depleting because we're trying to help fight two different wars.
Again, And maybe it's because it's not so much that I'm agreeing with a lot of what you're saying. It's the way you are saying it. And it's the simplicity of breaking down things that people are struggling to understand the importance of it. So I encourage people out there to go download episodes of This Week Explained, because I want to get to my final question here before I let you go, Kervin, is really about not only your show, but why your show's topics matter, why foreign policy matters. We've seen voter polls that have said that foreign policy is always registering at the bottom for people when it comes to voting issues. It's always right. The economy, what's playing out, maybe with immigration, depending upon which demographic of folks you're talking to. But foreign policy, even for focus groups we've done here in the state of Florida and the state of Illinois, it's always down near the bottom. And yet, here's a major part of the presidency right now in Biden's first term in office, where he's fighting two wars, neither of which he started, right?
Yeah.
Getting us out of wars. And here come two more. And a lot of polling so far has been shown that people are being affected by this. You got a lot of folks that are Israeli or Jewish that live here. You've got folks that are Palestinian that live here, and we're seeing emotions play out. So I want to give you a chance to really talk to our audience about why foreign policy matters, and then why they should tune in to new episodes of This Week Explained. But tell the people why this stuff matters outside of the US.
Yeah, definitely. So let me pose maybe a question to you first. What's the number one thing people are worried about?
The number one thing people are worried about, it's got to be the economy. Domestically.
There you go.
Yeah, of course.
Yep. I knew what the answer was going to be. I just wanted to pose it to you. Guess what? Foreign policy directly affects our economy. That's just a fact. Sanctions being in place on China affects the economy. How does it, the war in Ukraine affected supply chains. It affected the U.S. economy. You, on a personal level, are affected by every conflict that happens across the world, and you have no idea. And that's why foreign policy is so low on everyone's concern, and maybe why it's so high up on my concern, being an intel analyst and having dealt with all of this stuff and see the ramifications of it, that what you don't know actually is impacting you. You don't really care about. And on a human level, that's just true. If I don't, so I have 3 kids. If I don't know what they're doing with their friends, it has no impact on me. The moment I find out that they are doing something improper with their friends, that affects me. But I don't know about it until it comes to light. With foreign policy, a lot of things are happening behind the scenes that we don't see, or we can see it, but that's not what we're going to search out for, because it doesn't tug at our heartstrings. A conversation between Biden and Xi Jinping doesn't really tug at the heartstrings. But that, if that summit would have gone terribly bad, the stock market crashes, supply chains are disrupted. It affects your pocketbooks on a personal level. So I really would press people to keep in tune with foreign policy. The other thing is, and probably the number 2 thing that people worry about, is national security. I always joke that if you want to pass something in Congress, just slap national security on it and you're going to get all the votes you want. Because the government, to me, in my opinion, has one job: to keep its citizens safe. That is national security. And foreign policy directly affects national security. The way that Biden speaks about Israel is affecting national security right now. There are a lot of people within his own party who are up in arms because of how he is talking about Israel. Whether that's right or wrong, they are upset by it, and that's going to affect policy towards national security. And so it is very important to keep abreast to geopolitics. And I know it can be boring, and many people just don't understand what's actually going on. So you want me to plug the podcast? Here it goes. You hear me right now. This is how you're going to hear me on the podcast. I do it with my wife, who is just a civilian. She was a military wife for 15 years. She's had to deal with me talking about all of this for over 20 years now. And she's my question person. She's the person that keeps me on track. To be you, the audience, she is your voice. because she feels the same way about all of these things. I want to talk more about the economy. I want to know how this affects me on a personal level. And that's why we started This Week Explained, because I wanted to highlight to people that all of this nuance and all these little conflicts and things that may seem so distant affect you personally. And we try in a lot of our episodes to give tips and advice on how to keep yourself safe, how to understand when your pocketbooks are going to be hit, maybe start saving more. But the reason why we are paying more for groceries and cars and infrastructure is because of foreign policy. We are a global economy. Everything is based off of imports and exports and how we acquire different things, how material is made and manufactured. And a lot of that's been outsourced globally, and that's every country. So we're all being affected by it.
There you go. I could do no better job than telling you why you should go listen to This Week Explained. Or if you're on social media right now, if you're on Instagram, follow Aucoin Analytics. You can go check them out on LinkedIn. Kervin, I can't thank you enough for hopping on the podcast and giving us a couple minutes. I think you do a great job breaking all this stuff down. So continued success to you and your wife, and please stay safe.
Thank you, Mike. And I will tell everybody, listen to us, but also listen to this podcast as well. They're going to give you different opinions and different views. And I want you to use both of those views to formulate your own opinions. And your opinions do matter.
Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it. And we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.